For over a century, Russia has built some of the most powerful, unstoppable, and fearsome tanks in history. From massive experimental giants to battle-tested legends that changed the course of wars, and now to cutting-edge machines that define modern armored warfare. This is the story of every Russian tank ever made and the machines that strike fear on every battlefield. A legendary tank is coming next. Subscribe to see it first. T-18. The T-18 was the Soviet Union's first mass-produced tank in the 1920s. Lightweight and armed with a 37mm gun, it modernized the Red Army and paved the way for future Soviet tanks. T-19. The T-19 was an early Soviet medium tank developed in the late 1920s. Heavier and more powerful than the T-18, it featured better armor and a larger gun, aiming to improve the Red Army's armored capabilities. T-20. The T-20 was a Soviet experimental medium tank developed in the early 1930s. It featured improved armor and firepower compared to earlier models, serving as a stepping stone in the evolution of Soviet armored vehicles. T-26. The T-26 was one of the most widely produced Soviet light tanks in the 1930s. Based on the British Vickers design, it featured a 45mm gun and saw extensive service in conflicts before and during World War II, becoming a backbone of early Soviet armored forces. BT-2. The BT-2 was a fast Soviet light tank developed in the late 1920s as part of the BT series. Known for its speed and mobility, it could run on both tracks and wheels, making it ideal for rapid maneuvers and reconnaissance missions. BT-7. The BT-7 was the final and most advanced model of the Soviet BT light tank series, introduced in the mid-1930s. It combined high speed with improved armor and firepower, making it one of the most effective fast tanks of its era. T-60. The T-60 was a Soviet light tank produced during World War I, introduced in 1941. It was lightly armored and armed with a 20mm gun, primarily used for reconnaissance and supporting infantry on the front lines. Despite its limitations, it helped fill the urgent need for armored vehicles during the early stages of the war. T-70. The T-70 was a Soviet light tank introduced in 1942 during World War II. It featured a 45mm gun and improved armor compared to the T-60, serving primarily in reconnaissance and infantry support roles on the Eastern Front. T-80. The T-80 is a Soviet main battle tank introduced in 1976. It was one of the first tanks to use a gas turbine engine, giving it high speed and mobility. Equipped with a 125mm smoothbore gun and strong armor, it became a key component of Soviet and later Russian armored forces. KV-1. The KV-1 was a Soviet heavy tank introduced in 1939, named after Defense Minister Kliment Voroshilov. With very thick armor and a 76.2mm gun, it could withstand most German anti-tank weapons early in World War II, making it a formidable opponent on the battlefield. KV-2. The KV-2 was a Soviet heavy tank used during World War II, introduced in 1940. Armed with a massive 152mm howitzer and very thick armor, it was designed to destroy fortified positions, though its huge turret made it slow and difficult to maneuver. IS-1. The IS-1 was a Soviet heavy tank introduced in 1943 during World War II. Armed with an 85mm gun and improved armor, it was designed to replace the KV series and counter German heavy tanks, marking the beginning of the powerful IS tank family. PT-76. The PT-76 was a Soviet amphibious light tank introduced in the early 1950s. Designed for reconnaissance and river crossing operations, it could operate on land and water and was armed with a 76mm gun, making it widely used by many countries during the Cold War. ASU-57. The ASU-57 was a Soviet airborne self-propelled gun introduced in the early 1950s. Lightweight and compact, it was designed to be airdropped with paratroopers and armed with a 57mm gun to support airborne forces against light armor. ASU-85. The ASU-85 was a Soviet airborne self-propelled gun introduced in the late 1950s. Armed with an 85mm gun and better armor than the ASU-57, it was designed to support airborne troops by engaging enemy armor and fortified positions. IS-4. The IS-4 was a Soviet heavy tank developed at the end of World War II and introduced in the late 1940s. It featured extremely thick armor and a 122mm gun, but its heavy weight and mechanical issues limited its production and frontline use. IS-7. The IS-7 was an experimental Soviet heavy tank developed in the late 1940s. With extremely thick armor, a powerful 130mm gun, and advanced features for its time, it was one of the most heavily armed tanks ever designed, but it never entered mass production.